Episode 5 of Lessons in Chemistry CH3COOH is over, but we're just getting started on post-show recaps. I am Dr. Amanda, and I am joined by first author to my second author, the great Dr. Melissa. Melissa, how are you?
I'm great. Amanda, we can definitely take co-first authorship. I'm sure that that's which, by the way, is definitely like a thing that I've been subjected to. It's weird. No one cares.
Is that real? Is co-first authorship real?
I think it's one of those where it's like, well, you did a lot. You both did a lot of work. This is the thing, is because second authorship is like not as impressive as first authorship. And so when two people do a lot of work for a paper, it's like, well, we want to give you both credit, which is hard. So
But one of them has to go first in the co-first
yeah,
author. How do you
I know.
decide which one goes first in that? I mean, it's alphabetical probably, but still, you want to be the first co-first author. You don't want to be the second co-first
Yeah.
author.
Actually, I was so ironically, I was third at one paper that I was on. There were co-first authors, and then I was the next one. And so it was like I had this little like asterisk on my CV of like, technically I'm like the second author on this paper, but really the third author. I don't know. I did a lot of work on this paper, and I don't know how to reflect that properly.
Wow. Yeah, these are all of the ticky-tack things you have to worry about in academia, listeners. But all you have to worry about is subscribing to the podcast. That's a great way to support everything that we're doing at Lessons in Chemistry and also make sure that you don't miss any of our coverage. You can find us by searching for post show recaps, Apple TV, wherever you get your pods. Also, give us your ratings and reviews. Don't be like reviewer number 2. You can be very positive. Obviously, this means a lot to Melissa and I in our beleaguered states after years and years of abuses in academia. And consider becoming a patron of Post Show Recaps. That gives you early access to podcasts as well as patron exclusive podcasts. Any level of patronage gives you access to the Discord where we are sharing recipes and talking about the book and talking about the show and having a lot of fun. You can talk to Melissa, you can talk to me, you can talk to all of your other favorite Post Show Recaps hosts. And merch is also available at higher levels. So do that by signing up at patreon.com/postshowrecaps or postshowrecaps.com/Patreon. Melissa, episode 5, CH3COOH. So that's, let me see if I can get this. That's 1 carbon.
Yep.
3 hydrogen.
Yep.
Is this another carbon or is this a C?
Yep.
Okay, another carbon. And then is this, so now I'm confused. So two oxygens and a hydrogen?
Yeah, and so it's written this way because of the structure of the molecule, but you can also call it like there's different arrangements. You can just clump all of these together, and it can be I believe you can do, O2H. There's lots of different. We're really testing how long it's been since I took organic chemistry. But CH3 is, again, don't come for me, Cass, a methyl group. And so it's sort of saying there's like a methyl on here, and then there's also like a hanging off oxygen, 2 oxygens and a hydrogen. And so it's kind of telling you the structure of this molecule in the way that it's written here, and what this sort of why it's clumped up this way.
Got it.
So it's saying there's like a main methyl structure, and then there's another carbon, and then there's like, a little like oxygen, hydrogen hanging off, and then another oxygen off the other carbon. So it's weird science stuff, but it is very funny to me that she calls it this and then has to clarify that it's basically just vinegar.
It's
She's
vinegar.
asking you to add vinegar. Yeah.
Yeah. Check Dr. Melissa's work, Bill the Chemist, just to make sure that she got that right. But did you instantly recognize this as vinegar?
No, absolutely not. It is. No. I looked at this and I was like, oh, this is familiar. And I had to look it up to know that it was acetic acid, because again, I took organic chemistry in 2008. So it's been a minute.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, so I definitely had to look it up, but it was yeah, it was very funny to me that then I was like acetic acid. I was like, "Oh, that's definitely going to be in stuff." And then when she's like, "It's vinegar." I'm like, "Yeah, that tracks. That makes sense."
Uh-huh.
Um
Yeah, and
yeah.
I've seen chefs or cooks or, like, use ETOH or ET, is that right? ETH to ETOH, ethanol, like,
Yep.
abbreviate alcohol as, it's
Yeah.
chemical notation, um, but that's very short, and this is much longer. I think I probably would have written vinegar unless she's actually using acetic acid, which you sometimes can get, like, just, like, powdered for like, if you were gonna try to make your own Sour Patch Kids or something, you would want to have something that was powdered in the strong stuff. But very, very funny that we start off that's the title of this episode, and we're going to find out why at the end. But we start the episode off, Melissa, with Elizabeth and Dr. Mason rowing, just as we, suspected that they were going to do. And this is the only Dr. Mason and rowing that we get in this whole episode.
This whole episode is weird. I enjoyed it, but I'm also so confused. And we got warned that time was going to just be a bit of a loose construct in this
Mm,
story by
mhm.
the book readers. So I appreciated that heads up. But I was just like, wait, so we're not going to see any of the fallout from last episode. We're not going. We have no
Right.
idea how she got to where she is with her job, with the rowing, with being a parent. We have no
Mhm.
idea how like Harriet and her family got to where Harriet's a
Yeah,
lawyer now. That just
we
happened.
don't know what happened, what's going on with that. Yeah.
Fine. So I felt like I was playing catch up for the first half of this episode where I was like, okay, this is the state of the story now. Okay, fine. She's
Yeah.
rowing, I guess. Cool. I sort of assumed that would happen eventually, so maybe I didn't need to see it. Um, but yeah, we're moving at a great clip.
We're moving at a great clip, just like Elizabeth and Dr. Mason are in their rowboat there. But like, maybe we can stomp down here at the beginning of this podcast a little bit, Melissa, and talk about how we're feeling 5 episodes into the show. Because I do feel like my impressions of this show are starting to coalesce, and I've been sort of kind of sprinkling in some commentary as we've gone along in our coverage of the first 4 episodes. But I do feel like this is a show that is decidedly good, not great for me, and has elements that I think are really, really working well. But and I'll do proper attribution because we, have academic integrity on this show. I started listening to a little bit of the Ringer podcast, The Watch, with Chris Ryan and Andy Greenwald. And like every now and then they pop in to do kind of their quick impressions of a new show. And they talked about lessons in chemistry. And one of them, I can't tell them apart, unfortunately, but somebody can tell me who is who. One of them was saying that like this is an example of like what Apple TV wants to do with their shows, and the way that Apple wants you to feel about like your iPhone and your iPad and their other products. It's like, they're famously, Apple doesn't let like villains have iPhones in
hmm
television shows. It's like it's this very like kind of positive, like they want it to be like a warm feel good, like not particularly challenging kind of
hmm
viewing experience. And I think that they probably took a beloved book and paired it with like a really talented, dynamic actor to lead in Brie Larson. And you're going to leave this show feeling like we fixed feminism and
Yep.
civil rights, and like all it's like going to tackle all of these things, and it's going to tie it up in a nice bow in like a very satisfying way, and it's not going to be a challenging experience, but it's going to give you all of this kind of feel good sensation. And like again, we've talked about like what some of the struggles are in adapting a book, to a television show, like, I don't feel like it's extremely successfully made that transition. And this is probably a book that would have worked better as maybe a movie, where
Mhm.
they would have been able to kind of use time in a more deliberate way rather than trying to track out this very specific episodic structure. But that's kind of my impressions at this point, that this feels like a show that had a checklist of things that it wanted to accomplish, like big star, like lofty themes, feel good messaging based on popular book, like, and now we'll talk about how I made some of these recipes, and I noticed that lessons in chemistry, like, this is the recipe website is obviously an Apple TV website, and they're doing a TikTok cooking contest. So it's like, it very much feels like this is tied up in like Apple marketing to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's definitely being pushed, right? Like every time if I open Apple, this is the one that it's like, "Hey, have you watched Lessons in Chemistry?" And I was like, "I have." And it's yeah, I don't I basically agree with everything that you said. Like good not great is absolutely my standard for this. And yeah, it's I don't think it's meant to be challenging your thoughts about
Mhm.
feminism or about race or about
Mhm.
what life was like in this time period or the struggle of underrepresented groups in
Right.
hi- highly like institutional like hierarchical structures. Like none of that's happening. It's just like, hey, did you know things used to be bad? uh
Mhm.
yeah, we did. We all did. That was not new. But cool. Like good to see. Very fun. It has brought about some conversations that like you and I have had that I think have been really fun,
Yeah.
and that is like uh, the biggest thing that I'm enjoying about it. And
Right.
unfortunately, usually when the podcast is my favorite part of a show, that's not a great sign of the quality of the show. As much as I love podcasting with you about it. Um,
Mm.
so I think that it is tricky when absolutely Brie Larson is like knocking it out of the park. I think she's doing
Mhm.
incredibly. I think so many of this cast are doing wonderfully on this, and it has been fun to watch. I don't know that I wanted a show of this story to be fun to watch, is I think part of the
Mm.
problem,
Mhm.
right? Like I think that
Mhm.
it is it's been a very like kind of other than episode 2, like decently enjoyable show. And it's like, "Oh yeah, that's hard, but we are sort of um watching this character, but we're not like sticking with it. She's just sort of like bouncing along through the storyline
Yeah.
so quickly that I'm like, okay, well now she's selling Tupperware, and okay, now she's got a TV show, and okay, now
Mhm.
she's got a daughter in elementary school, and it's
Mhm.
um yeah, I don't know if I get that that pacing is a holdover from the book, um but you can give so much more context in a book that I think is probably why it might have worked better in another
Mhm.
medium. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't want to seem overly down on it. I'm enjoying
Yeah.
it. I'm happy that I'm watching it. I'm especially happy that we're covering it. I think that that has been really fun. And I hope that it has given people who are watching it some extra enjoyment to hear us talking about it. But I also know that a lot of people really, really enjoyed this book, and I hopefully are um
Mhm.
not too upset that we're kind of mediocre on this story. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that there were interesting things that came about that some of these emotional moments have been really great, right? Like
Mhm.
Harriet and Elizabeth talking about her not being able to be a mother, right? Like
Mhm.
that's a conversation that will stand out for me for quite a bit. Um and there's not been there's nothing else like that that's really coming to mind right now. That
Mm.
might be like the one like
Yeah.
really,
I mean, I
really
think
big
that
one.
the love story probably works, like,
Mhm,
for a lot of people. Like, there were some really sweet moments there.
for
Actually,
sure.
I'm really enjoying her relationship with Walter Pine that we'll get into this episode, her TV producer. I think that there's some nice moments there. I totally agree with you, Melissa, that I am thoroughly enjoying this, and I don't want to be down on it. The subject matter is very much in my wheelhouse, but I do feel like I need to make the distinction between, like, just because as a podcaster who, like, values my own endorsement and wants the listeners to say, like, when I tell you Severance is excellent, I mean that it's in this category, and this is a show that's, like, not necessarily at that level, which doesn't mean that it's not still, like, a valuable show to exist and something that I'm enjoying watching, and all of that. And I don't think that every television show has to be excellent, but one of, like, the challenges I think now in this era of prestige and with, like, Apple and Amazon and all these other big streamers in the game is that shows can, like, have phenomenal casts and be extremely, like, highly produced and, like, have the veneer of being, like, one of these excellent standout shows and then still vary in quality. And I just think that that's something that, as, a podcaster about television, I want to acknowledge that I think that this is a really good show, but not, like, at the same caliber as some of the shows that I give my highest recommendation.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, right? Like, if we only watched the peak of peak television, there'd be a lot of TV that's not on air right now. And people enjoy watching TV of all types of caliber, and I don't think this is a bad show.
No.
This is absolutely not the worst show you and I have podcasted about.
Oh my gosh. No,
just
not
to
by a
even,
long
like,
shot. Yes.
just to even set that very low bar. So I think it's great. It's just, I think, not quite hitting some of what I thought the show was going to be. I think I thought it was going to be a really interesting reflection of feminism and academia, and it's just been a bit, like, overly, like, vanilla in terms of that story. It's just not got a lot of nuance to it. It's just the, like, cartoonish villainy of this whole thing has just been a bit like, well, yeah, but also there's other ways that this manifests, and so it's just like, well, maybe that's harder to portray on a TV, or maybe at the time some of misogyny hadn't gone quite so subtle at that point. It could just be a lot more overt. So fair enough. But yeah, it's just been interesting that I do think you're right. I think that sometimes the show gives us the impression that, like, man, good thing things aren't like they used to be, right? Everybody, we're all doing great now.
Yeah, so I'm glad we got to talk a little bit about that up top. Like, now we can jump into the episode, but, like, one thing I just wanted to say that I realized watching this episode too is, like, I still don't fully understand why Elizabeth loves cooking so much. Like, and maybe this is gonna
Does she love it, or does she, like, need it to survive because it's very important work, I guess?
Yeah. So maybe we'll put it. Maybe they'll reintroduce more of that as the show goes on. But in episode 5, I expected to have, like, a little bit more of an understanding of, like, why, as a single person, she was, like, perfecting these elaborate meals for herself just to bring them to lunch, and, like, now how this fits into her entire worldview. But let's get back to the show. We see that the scenes of Elizabeth and Dr. Mason rowing are interspersed with other scenes from her life where she's on the phone for giving invitations to her Tupperware party. That's, what her main source of income is now. While she's preparing for this party, she sees that Dr. Donati and Dr. Borowitz are on the cover of Scientific American saying, "Do these men know how life began?" And I'm going to say, probably not. And Elizabeth throws the Scientific American into the garbage. And then immediately takes out her lab equipment to angrily start rage working.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly done my fair share of, like, rage titrations.
Is it a good stress release, Melissa?
No, absolutely not. It's incredibly precise, and it's not a good thing to do when you're raging. No. I think my funniest, lab story is that I was my first year of university, I was working in a cellular biology lab, and I was doing this like DNA experiment. And so I had to replicate it 150 times because,
Oh
again,
my goodness.
replication is,
Yeah.
critical. But it was like all the different conditions and stuff, and we were up. So I was running, and there was like my limitations were usually like, well, I can only fit. There's only 16 wells in this, so I have to run them in like batches of 16 basically. And I was like constantly like, while this is going, then I'm starting the next one. And it was moving, it was crazy. I was running through stuff, and it was this like multi-hour experiment, and I was just running it back to back to back. And so I was in the lab alone on a Friday night, like trying to get through all of this. Everybody else had left for the weekend, and I was like still working, still trying to get this done. And the radio was in the top corner of the lab, and I couldn't figure out how to change the radio station, and it was playing like love music. Like I can't even remember, but the
Uh-huh.
radio station was all like, "Here's the song for you and your special someone on this Friday evening." Blah blah blah.
Oh
And I was like,
no.
"No, I'm in a lab, miserable by myself." And I was like, "I don't want to be listening to this kind of music right now." But I couldn't figure out how to change. I
Oh
couldn't like reach the
no.
radio, and I didn't know how to change it. And so I was just like
This sounds
very
like one of the
angrily doing
circles
science.
of hell, Melissa, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I was just like rage pipetting at that point. I think I was just like, what is happening? How do I get out of here? Why can't I not listen to this like smooth jazz on
Oh
like a
gosh.
Friday? I was like, no, I need heavy metal on my Friday night in the lab.
Yeah, well, Calvin was like very specific about his lab music, so I think he would have completely understand where you were coming from. Um, Elsewhere in Elizabeth's life, we see that she and Matt are grocery shopping together. We get some of Elizabeth's like moralizing about not eating cereal that shares ingredients with jet fuel. Mad's asking questions about her father. She asks, "What color were dad's eyes?" And Elizabeth says, "Blue, like yours. You know how recessive genes work." And I write in all caps, "That is not how recessive genes work." The fact that Madeline has blue eyes does not mean that her father had blue eyes. It could mean that he was carrying a recessive blue eye gene and had brown eyes. So,
Yeah, that is literally the opposite of how recessive genes work.
mhm.
Yeah, it's so
Yikes,
dumb.
Elizabeth.
That
Yikes.
is very funny.
Um, but Madeline is asking these questions because she has an assignment to fill out a family tree, as we know from last episode, and she knows nothing about her father. Elizabeth disagrees with this. He was a brilliant scientist, kind, a very funny dancer, and my favorite person in the whole world before I met you. She asks more questions about their extended family, where, we find out that, they don't have any of these relationships anymore, and asks Elizabeth if they're alone. And Elizabeth says, "We are the opposite of alone. We have each other. We have 6:30. We have a huge family waiting at home for us for dinner." And tells Madeline that you're the chef and asks what groceries she needs. So I thought that this scene was very sweet. We've talked about that
Mhm.
notion of like chosen family. This is the first nod to the fact that, like, at age 7 in Madeline's life, they're still very close to the Sloanes. They've kind of like formed this family. And I also really like that, like, Elizabeth and Madeline cook together. It's like one of my favorite things to do with my kids. So I thought that this was sweet.
It's super sweet. I loved it. And yeah, I love that whole like we have family. It just doesn't look like this tiny little family tree that your teacher gave you because
Right.
that's not how all families look. And
Hmm.
I loved it. I did look up butylated hydroxytoluene.
Oh, good for you.
Um
Yeah.
yeah, so um first of all, it it was a bit of a like I I don't know. I expect a bit better from Elizabeth. This felt a little bit like, chemicals, like we don't want
Uh-huh.
chemicals in
Yeah.
our food kind of thing,
Right,
which
right,
like
right.
chemicals in all your food. That's how
Mhm. You're an
like
organic
molecules.
chemist. You should
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah. So but I did look it up. So it is a derivative of phenol. It's useful for its antioxidant properties. So it's used to
Hmm.
prevent free radical mediated oxidation in fluids like fuels and oils. So it's recognized as the FDA, generally safe in small amounts, though there is some concerns about its use. It naturally occurs in phytoplankton, including green algae and lychee, which I thought was cool. And again,
Oh.
if anyone ever tells you that something is safe because it's natural, no, it's not. That's not
No.
how anything works. Um, but it's also not necessarily not safe because it's not natural,
Mhm.
because chemistry. So what it does is it prevents organic compounds from being attacked by oxygen and like breaking down.
Mhm.
And so, uh, you know, not that you need to like go eat a whole ton of blueberries or whatever, because that's not how it works, but antioxidation is like helpful for avoiding food spoilage. It basically decreases the rate at which like texture and flavor of food changes, so it's been added as like an
Mm.
additive to things.
Mhm.
It is also found in as an industrial additive, cosmetic ingredients, pesticides, plastic and rubber, as well as medical and veterinary research. There is back in 1986, they found a possible link with cancer, but the research has shown basically both, like it might increase your risk of cancer, but it also might decrease your risk of cancer. So highly unsure. Some companies have like
Yeah.
chosen to take it out of their food just because. Um, but there's kind of no scientific consensus around it. It
Mm.
also might have antiviral properties, but again, no scientific consensus there.
Research
But
is really hard, people, especially
yeah,
nutritional research. It's really, really hard. So
yeah,
thank
a
you.
lot
Thank
of
you.
food science is wild. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Melissa, for all of that background.
yeah.
Incredible.
She said
Um,
this word, and I was like, "Hold on a sec," and I like went back and I paused it, and I was like, What word are you saying right now?" And I like turned on the closed captioning, and I was like, "Got it, okay." And then I like went down a thing, and I
I
was like,
love that.
What? I don't know what all those vowels are. Which vowel are you saying?" Especially because a lot of these chemical names are very, very similar.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
got it.
And then, like, speaking of another thing, like a kind of link to showing a little bit of like a lay person's understanding of chemistry. We see like a mother struggling outside with two rowdy boys outside of the grocery store. And again, like I think this is like a little bit of implanting in Elizabeth, like the mission that she's going to take on as the host of Supper at 6 of like valuing homemaking and what's traditionally women's work and like family rearing and cooking. But she says, I just want 5 minutes of quiet. If I'm being greedy, I'd ask them to set the table and say thank you. So set the table, which is going to become part of her catchphrase, but I'd settle for just 5 minutes. And then Madeline makes a comment about how those boys are so rowdy. And Elizabeth mentions this chemical name again. And I was like, Elizabeth, like that is not how like behavior works. It's not like you
Yeah.
gave your kid the wrong cereal and now they're a monster, but Madeline is like a well-behaved little angel because you gave her the right cereal.
Yeah, like, gosh, there's so much shaming for moms around all of this, right? Like, so much of the,
Mhm.
like, organic, free range, gluten-free food that you've, like, gotta be constantly giving your kids,
Right.
right? Like, I can't even imagine, and so often it's like, I don't know, like, feed your kids, and other than that,
Yeah.
like, that's fine.
And I'll say, like, as a diversion, because, like, what else are we doing on this podcast? But,
Yeah.
I mean, I am somebody who, like, cares a lot about food and I feed my kids, I cook with my kids, I, like, make very deliberate choices, like, I don't go nuts, like, my kids got regular Halloween candy and ate it all probably too fast, and so I think that like, I think that all of this stuff is important. I center it in my life and my family's life. But I definitely think that this shaming that like if you give your kids the right diet, they'll be like well behaved. And like, parenting choices matter and all of that. But if you have a kid who's really hyperactive and difficult to control, and somebody else has a kid who's not hyperactive and seems like very, very well behaved, that's probably just that those are different kids. Like
Right.
it's probably not because one of them was fed the right things and one of them like had a parent that made all the right choices. They're just probably different kids and the hyperactive kid has other strengths that are going to serve them well in life. And like I think all of this like centering this notion about like how a parent's choice is going to contribute to all of these different child behavior things is as much overstated.
Yeah, very fair.
Okay, so back at dinner with the Sloanes, they're talking about how Elizabeth has this TV offer, and she's kind of already brushed it off. Obviously, as we saw in the last episode, she's not really considering it. They talk about Madeline's project. She tells the Sloane children that they're lucky they have a father, and then she says that she's just being provocative. Amidst the conversation, Harriet finds that there's a letter from the Phillips lab about Elizabeth's job application there. She opens it up and reads it and finds out that she's made the final round of interviews and they're asking for references. One of the Sloane children asks what a reference is, and I like this Elizabeth's explanation. It's when someone you no longer want to work with holds the fate of your next job.
Too real.
It's very awkward. It's very awkward, the whole process of references.
Yeah. And it's funny, we don't totally know what type of position she's applying for here. I would assume that she's not necessarily able to apply for a chemist position, right? That seems
Right.
to be, and so maybe it's another lab tech position here or whatever. And so in which case this like many rounds of interviews might be a bit strange, but I imagine for your job, like gosh, even my job outside of industry, it was a couple interviews, right? Like this like multi-round thing. I think is pretty
Yeah.
common outside of academia as well as but definitely inside of
Yeah.
academia. It's like a whole day process.
Yeah, the final, like, stage of an academic interview is usually, like, a full day that goes from, like, morning, like, 8 a.m. through to a dinner after your full day where you're still sort of being interviewed, and through the course of the day, you meet with various people, you give what's called a job talk, which is, like, an academic presentation of your whole program of research. It's extremely involved. It's very involved. It's exhausting, and, like, that's after preparing easily, like, I think the last academic job application I put in was like a total of like 30 pages of like a research plan, a teaching plan, and like all of these different components that you have to put together in addition to your cover letter and your CV. It's a lot.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth has to go back to the Hastings lab, much to her chagrin, to ask Dr. Donati for a reference, but he no longer works there. They wanted some new blood, and that new blood is old blood recirculated. Borowitz is now the head of the Hastings lab.
This guy just keeps
Yeah.
popping. He's like the epitome of like failing forward of like,
Mm,
I don't know. He basically keeps getting like handed uh positions he didn't earn, I think,
right.
is sort of how this is going. Anyway, this guy
And
sucks.
and that's basically like Donati was like a suit too, right? It's like it's these
Yeah.
people who are like not particularly brilliant or visionary, but are just kind of willing to go along with the company line that get elevated and elevated. But Borowitz does recognize that Elizabeth is brilliant at least, like whereas Donati did not. And Elizabeth asks for a recommendation and she says, either write me a good recommendation befitting of my skills or tell me that you're going to deliberately block my career advancement like Dr. Donati did. Um, and he doesn't want to offer her a recommendation because he would like to offer her a job as junior chemist in the DNA lab. We'll publish together. I'd even give you second author.
Yeah, and it's a bit wild in some ways. Like I'm I'm slightly of two minds of it. I absolutely understand why she is not taking this offer and why the fact that this man stole her work and is now wanting to like still place himself above her is incredibly frustrating. There's also a part of me and I think that this is probably some like deeply seated academic trauma that I'm like second author's not bad. It would like get her a lot of it would give her a chance to work in a lab and like get her
Yeah.
name on a bunch of publications and I was like I think I think I was in academia too long. I think the fact that offer sounds good is probably says more about me and my experience
Right.
in academia than anything else.
Right. Well, I fully agree with you, Melissa, because on the one hand, I was like, well, as somebody who's like master's level and is going to be like, this is
Yeah.
probably better than she's going to get at Phillips or anywhere else. And it's like this could be her pathway to, getting out from under this and maybe getting more independence. Like I think that this is like if she's decided that she wants to continue to work for one of these chemistry institutes here, like I think that this is not a bad offer. Like I was having the same feeling, but like if you take that kind of attitude and extrapolate that at the long view, I mean, we talked about Einstein, I'm sorry, I forget her first name today, which is exactly the point that I forget her first name because like even though this woman like may have contributed like very substantially and essentially to the work of Albert Einstein, like because she's not first author, because like she's going to be like relegated to this footnote in history, and Elizabeth has too much pride to do that. So I like that she ends up rejecting this. And the fact that this is like an offer presented to her by the person who stole
Mhm.
her work and lied about it. And somebody that she knew was not like worthy of the honors that he's gotten. You can tell that that would just be so much more injurious.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't blame her at all for not wanting to accept this.
Mhm.
But yeah, it is just sort of funny that she's sort of taking the chance here that if she doesn't want to be a footnote, then she's going to go and try to do it on her own. And there's a chance that she doesn't get to do it at all that way, but she believes in
Mhm.
herself enough. She believes in her own capabilities, either at home or potentially through this other job or whatever that she's got going on, that she can be more than be a footnote, which I applaud her for, and is something that was stamped right out of me.
Oh gosh. Oh, Melissa.
Sorry.
Oh.
No one should ever talk to me about academia and in a if they were like wanting to do it. It's
Well,
unfortunately.
you'll
But
get
Dr.
2
Amanda has had a wonderful career.
I stuck with it. You get 2 perspectives. Neither one is right. They're both but there's a lot of nuance. You'll get 2 perspectives on this podcast. At public elementary school, Madeline is causing trouble when they're working on their family tree exercise. And Amanda asks if one of the branches is a dog, and the teacher says no, it's a person. To which Madeline correctly points out people are animals because people are mammals and mammals are animals. And this, disrupts the whole class because the student acts like a monkey. But the teacher wants to see Madeline after class. Why don't you ask the boy who was acting like a monkey to stay after class? Isn't he the one who disrupted the class, Melissa?
Absolutely. Madeline was just asking questions. This was so dumb. Yeah. Also, the teacher's wrong. And anyway, teachers
No, this
are
was yes, this was so dumb, but this is not unlike my elementary school experience at all, where like I was like I went to a Catholic school. I had a lot of like very anti-intellectual teachers. I'm Jewish, so they didn't like me because I was like the uppity Jew who was asking questions and getting us ahead. And like this definitely felt very, very much like something that might have happened while I was in elementary school. So that it rung true to me.
Yeah. Did you read this situation? I sort of read it as it seemed to me like Madeline was like sort of sticking up for her
Amanda,
classmate
yeah,
here. Yeah,
mhm.
which I thought was very sweet, and then getting in trouble for it. Um, this next part is gonna be what felt like it rung, very true for me as we get to it. But yeah.
Yeah, so Elizabeth gets interrupted from her Tupperware party because the school is calling about Mad, and she has to go and have a meeting with the teacher who thinks that Madeline is being disruptive because she's not challenged, and she should go to a school with a more advanced curriculum that would keep her engaged, and recommends a private school, which Elizabeth had never considered.
Yeah, so I think this is certainly more of a thing in in the US, I think, than in Canada. Like, we have
Mm.
private schools, but the majority of them are religious. There's, like, a
Mhm.
very small number for wealthy families of, like, private school, at least in Vancouver.
Mhm.
Like, um, there's a handful. There was one in my hometown that was, like, not a religious private school.
Mhm.
Um, so it was, like, not I'm sure it was a thing that was, like, encouraging people to go to private school for their education or whatever, but I don't think it's, like,
Mm.
as emphasized as, like, a need,
Yeah.
there. But my mom was told when I was, um, in preschool, they were like, "So she seems very bored. We need to, like, give her things to
Mhm.
do." And so that was why I was put in French immersion, because
Mm.
apparently if I had to learn it in another language, that would be harder, I guess. So,
Mhm.
which was fine, but it was very funny. And then I was like, be this is, like, not I don't know, this is, like, both embarrassing, and I don't know, but I was, like, handed, like, blank manila envelopes by my elementary school teachers of, like, extra work to do because I was,
Mhm.
like, finishing the work too quickly, and I
Mhm.
wanted, like, more math to do, and so
Aw,
because I didn't
Melissa.
wanna get, like, teased by the other kids, they would hand me, like, covert
Like,
like,
secret
envelope
secret
like,
math.
secret math. I got secret math in elementary school because I because I needed to be challenged and I wanted to do more math. Um, and then it was very funny because they basically ran out of secret math, and so I just started, like, going to the high school to do math for a while. Um, and I was, like, just, like, ahead in math in high school as a result of
Mhm.
that, but it was very funny that it was, like, my elementary school teachers were like, yeah, she's in we're having trouble with her because she's just, like, reading all the time in class and not, like, listening to us in class, and my mom's like, "Okay, you can't be, like they can't be teaching you things and you're just, like, sitting at your desk reading something else. You do have to and I was like, "Ah, but it's boring." And so that was, like, the kind of trouble that I got into in elementary
Uh-huh,
school because they're
uh-huh,
like, "She's doing
adorable.
other things that is." Yeah. I would be, like,
Yeah.
hiding my book, like, in my desk and thinking I was getting away with it, and I'm sure I was not.
Yeah, the school, like the private school, public school, charter school thing is such a mess in the US. Um, and I think that like the biggest difference between kids who go to private school and kids who go to public school is that the kids who go to private school have more money,
Yep.
rather than like that they're getting more challenge necessarily. But of course, like, I think some you have to find the school that's right for your kid. And there's reason for Elizabeth to be concerned that Madeline is not, getting what she needs developmentally here. So she asks Madeline if she likes school, to which Madeline says no one likes school. That's a fact. Um, which
Not a
is
fact.
like,
I love
yeah,
school.
some people do like school. And so this really starts to raise Elizabeth's concern that she should try to send Madeline to private school, which is going to obviously involve making more money than she can as a single mother running Tupperware parties out of her home.
How did she end up running Tupperware parties? She was doing, like, chemistry consults in the living room last time. I guess this is
Maybe
in
she has like
addition, she needed more
multiple
work.
side hustles, like things that
Yeah.
she can do that fit into her life.
But, like, a
So
Tupperware party seems like the last thing. I'd like there's so much, like, schmoozing and stuff. Also, Tupperware parties are just, like, the first stages of MLMs, right? Like, this
mhm,
is I was
yeah,
thinking about this at the time. I was like,
right.
you just go and you host a party and your friends all have to spend, like, a certain amount of money at the party or whatever.
Totally.
It was a whole thing that I remember, like, my mom going to that I
Your
feel
mom
like
went to Tupperware parties?
I remember she went to, like, a spice party or something. It was,
Oh,
like, all
yeah.
of and so she came back with this, like, array of, like, different, like, spices. Anyway, she went to, like, a various things. She didn't do it a lot. It was, like, definitely not, I think, we didn't have a ton of money, so I think my mom was definitely
Mhm.
not like, "Okay, can't afford to do that all the time," but I think, a friend invited
Yeah.
her, so she went over and was trying to be supportive.
Yeah. Now that you
But
mention
yeah.
it, I remember, I knew, like, people who were doing, like, Cutco knife parties, like,
Right, yeah.
yeah, knife sets or something, very
Yeah.
funny.
Now we just, sell leggings and weird
On
protein powders.
Instagram, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Pine goes to pick up Amanda from the Zott, household to return Tupperware, from the chicken pot pie, which he says tasted even better the next day. And she explains that as it cools, the starch goes through a process called retrogradation. The molecules restructure into a crystalline form, and the flavor compounds are trapped in said structure. Which, completely goes over Mr. Pine's head, Walter Pine's head, and she invites him in while she's making dinner. We see them in the kitchen together. He kind of comments on how interesting her kitchen is, and she says it's because it's my lab that I also cook in. We find out some background on Walter. He's divorced. His ex-wife is in Nevada somewhere on a trip of spiritual enlightenment. He's been a single dad for 3 months and feels like an uncoordinated octopus. And Elizabeth passes on the same advice that she got from Harriet. Nobody is equipped to do this, but then you expand. You think you can't do it, and then you do it anyway.
Yeah, I appreciated this. This is clearly something that has stuck with her. It was a very good line
Mhm.
at the time. I chemistry people, let me know if this retrogradation thing makes any sense to
Hmm.
me, because like from what I'm reading, retrogradation is the process that's related to like bread going stale. So I just
Interesting.
maybe like
Oh,
the
well, bread
next.
going bread going stale though, like it does kind of is that because it's going from being soft to more crystalline and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but it's like, does that make food taste better? I don't know. That's the part that
Mm.
I'm like, I don't know. I think you just like threw a chemistry thing that happens in there. I'm slightly skeptical about that connection. So let me know. But yeah, it is sort of cool that it's like this gelatinized starch realigning itself as it cools after being cooked. So that's all. It's like it is true that that is what is happening. I am skeptical that it makes the food taste better, but we'll
Hmm.
see.
I want to say I have tremendous affection for this character who's played by Kevin Sussman, who's also in Wet Hot American Summer, which is one of my favorite movies and like a somewhat small-ish role. He's also was in Children's Hospital and some other like funny things and small roles. But I think he just has this like very gentle kindness and approachability. And I like his relationship with Elizabeth, and like what that's going to mean as this goes forward. So I'm enjoying Walter very much.
Yeah, I am too. He definitely seems um a little. I had been a bit nervous in um how what his situation was going to be like. I was also nervous that he was being set up as some sort of love interest, but I don't think that's
Mm,
the case. It seems like
no,
this is
yeah.
just he seems like a good quality person who really loves TV, Amanda.
He
We'll get
loves
to that part.
TV. And when he
Yeah.
said that, I was like, I love TV too. We love
Yeah.
we're your people. We love TV. But and just to kind of like say a little bit more though, it's like he and Dr. Mason and Harriet to some extent, and the Reverend Walkner, all of these characters like are still like a little bit magical, like and
Mhm.
one-dimensional kind of like guardian angels of Elizabeth that like I think that
Absolutely.
maybe a better show would like yeah, we have his backstory, but that doesn't seem to really play into him as a character. Like I think in a better show, these would be more kind of fully formed three-dimensional characters.
Yeah, fair enough. Side note, I realized where I know Charlie Sloane from.
Oh.
I was watching this and I was like, why does he look so familiar? He's Calvin Owens in Greek, which I have watched more than once. So yeah, just back to that CW era, I guess. Anyway, it was very
Okay.
funny. I was like, Calvin Owens grew up and is on a Family Man now. Anyway, I
Mhm.
appreciated that. So
Dr.
for all
Sloan, the
my
family
fellow
man.
Greek watchers out there, that's where you know him from.
Um, sorry, Elizabeth gives Walter a potato ricer, gives him, gets him to go to work. And he says, this is why I thought you'd be a TV star because you respect your audience. You don't talk down to people. You meet them where they are and somehow you raise them up. And Elizabeth says, well, if this was going to work, we'd have to be 50-50 partners. And he says, no, that's not how it works. And she goes on to start rejecting him. And he says, it would be your show. You control every aspect of it. If I do my job right, no one would even know who I am.
Which is kind of an interesting, um thing for him to say, right? That is his whole goal, is for people to,
Mhm.
to be able to step back and let Elizabeth shine, which is just, first of all, so
Right.
foreign in this world that
Yeah.
we've been told for a man to do that for a woman. But also, yeah, just like kind of a cool idea when you think about it, that so many of these shows and movies and stuff, all of the work that it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, if you don't if they're done well enough, you don't even think about it, right? It's the moment
Right.
that you're like, "Oh, that weird sound clip that like suddenly
Yeah.
takes you out of a scene or something," right? Like,
Yeah.
or whatever. Like, if you're not noticing stuff, that's usually a sign of how amazing it is, right? Like, so often on um Doctor Who, we're like shouting out the music, and I'm like, gosh, I didn't even notice because it was just
Mhm. You
so
you're
like
so
I was
sucked
so
into it.
emotional about it. And yeah, and I have to go back
Right.
and like listen to it specifically.
And especially in these, like, personality-driven type of shows, like a cooking show or, like, a daytime show. Like, I mean, think about it, it's like with Oprah, like, nobody's thinking about who are the other producers behind it.
Yeah.
Just feels like it all comes from her, and that's the vision of what he wants to make into Elizabeth into, and this is so foreign to her coming from this world of academia where everything is about credit and the people like and she's so used to being like in the acknowledgments or second
Mhm.
author like is the best that she could ever aspire for and the idea that she could actually put her effort into something that she would get due credit for is like a completely revelatory idea to her and it's not surprising that this is going to all of a sudden become attractive as an option and she also adds that she needs money to pay for private school. And, Walter tells her this would be more than you've ever made.
Yeah, which is cool, and a very the draw from academia to something that actually pays well is the one I'm familiar with.
Right. And a lot of people, I think, in academia, like who end up leaving, experience this of like being in this world where like there's such a premium of like pouring blood, sweat, and tears into something that you're like not actually compensated very
Mhm.
much relative to your level of expertise if you put that up against what people make in other fields and then when you leave academia to go into industry where you actually are compensated at more competitive rates for the level of, expertise and training and effort that you put into something. I mean, it's like that's a big adjustment. That's a
Yeah,
very
and
culturally different world.
yeah, and you're supposed to do it basically for the love of it, right? You're kind of held
Mhm.
you're doing it because it's, the prestige and the
Mhm.
independence and the flexibility and the like, there's so many reasons that you're kind of enticed to stay. um Absolutely, and it's a reason why so many of us like start grad school thinking like,
Mhm.
yeah, could be great. um but and then it's interesting because like in my experience, you leave academia and your experience within academia isn't seen as work experience. Like,
Mm.
it's tricky to try to, like, I try to tell people I've been working in labs since 2006, but
Mhm.
I spent so much of that time as a trainee,
Right.
basically all of it. I was classified as a trainee, and so
Mhm.
it's, I'm sort of trying to uh, convince people that I'm capable enough and that I have experience enough, even though I'm seen as like, well, you have no
Mhm.
relevant real world experience. And I was like, okay, but I can do all of these things that you're asking me to do already. So it's yeah, it's a tricky kind of double-edged sword in that way, that leaving industry doesn't or leaving for industry doesn't necessarily
Mhm.
guarantee a paycheck, because like, at least in my experience, do feel like I've sort of been still starting at the bottom and now have to work myself my way up.
Yeah.
But now I'm a decade behind other
Right.
people who didn't do a PhD and two postdocs.
But you could have just, become a television star,
I
Melissa.
could
Would
have,
you
damn it.
consider that?
I
Yeah.
would have been clearly easier, right? No, absolutely not.
Mhm,
I'm
mhm.
uh but yeah, it is,
Well,
I
you're
don't
a
know, maybe
podcast
maybe in
star. That's why
podcast.
we
I was
that's why we
about to
jump
say,
that's why we jump to make those big podcast bucks.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
At the TV studio, Walter is giving Elizabeth a tour. I like there were some cute moments here. She's like, I can do my own hair and makeup. And he's like, no, you cannot. um, and he introduces her to the staff. Elizabeth is like very polite and like appreciates everybody's role. I really like that they've infused her character with like not really have like, even though they could make her seem a little bit snobby. She doesn't seem to like think that anybody's job is like beneath hers. A man approaches her and says coffee, and Elizabeth says, "Sure, how do you take it?" But the reversal is that he's there to get her the coffee.
I loved it. Loved it.
Yeah.
It was so funny. I was like, "Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't she?" To
Mhm.
which I was like, gosh, it's one of those things where she was so quick to be like, "Yeah, whatever." And I was like, "Can you imagine if that had been the case? The sheer audacity of this random man walking up to her being like, 'Hey, woman, make me coffee.'" And so I was like, very happy for her that that was
Yes.
not the case.
It's a corrective emotional experience. Walter takes her to see the kitchen studio, every woman's dream kitchen. But when she inspects the fake fruit, looks through the drawer, checks the oven, she just her ruling is this is revolting. So there's some
Yeah,
tension. Yeah.
it's very frilly, right? Like,
It's very pink. It's like very like I mean, it's 1950s. Like it looks like a play kitchen. It looks like what you would like have a little girl like with it's not, especially Elizabeth comes from her like lab slash kitchen
yeah.
hybrid. Um we get this tension right away between the studio wanting this to be a very fun, inviting, very like a male fantasy version of the housewife who like cheerfully comes home in her like dolled up look, making the cocktail, wanting nothing in the world more than to be cooking a delicious dinner for her husband. Elizabeth pushes back. Cooking is not fun. It is vital work. She tells, Walter her backstory that Madeline's father died before they knew that she was pregnant. They were soulmates. I really like the contrast between Walter's like romantic history and Elizabeth, and he says, "Oh no, no, we weren't soulmates. I don't even think she has a soul." Um, they're struggling to find the creative vision for this show, and Walter tells her to think about the show as an experiment.
Yeah, this was this whole scene was a bit wild to me. The fact that I appreciate the weight that she is giving to like homemaking and the importance of
Mhm.
that role and how I do think that that is very cool that that seems to be a big thesis of her show is like this is very important work that you're doing and it should be valued as such and um and that's really great. But she's also like it's not fun and I was like can it be a little fun? I I,
Well,
I
and
feel
this
like
is
you should
what
like it.
And this is why I was wondering, like, why has Elizabeth cultivated cooking so much?
Mhm.
Because, like, you can make nutritious, edible food without, like, perfecting a spring vegetable galette. Like, you don't
Right,
need
yeah.
like, there's a level at which it's like she must be getting some satisfaction out of this that is not completely utilitarian, even though they present her as being, like, very utilitarian. And it's like, I don't know, like experimenting to make the perfect lasagna, like just for the sake of it. Like there's something that's mismatched there for me. Like that they're not letting her have this kind of creative passion for it. I think at the same time, it's like you can have that and also say, like, this is extremely valuable work and this is like important for being for contributing to a household. But I think that like taking the joyfulness out of it and the creativity and like the just love of cooking is like a choice that isn't really working for me. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I think it feels like a bit of a misrepresentation of, like, scientific
Mhm.
discovery, right? Like, science is a very creative
Mhm.
endeavor, and it is something that requires a lot of, um yeah, it's like a different type of creativity. I used to think of myself as, like, not a particularly creative person, and then I had to,
Mhm.
like, recognize how much creativity is inherent in
Mm.
the process of like trying to come up with explanations and
Mhm.
questions and kind of the gathering of
Designing
ideas and
designing a study and yeah.
totally. And so I think that it's weird that she is being portrayed so utilitarian in that way because I think that there is so much that could translate of why she loves both of
Mhm.
these things, why she's so passionate about science, why she feels so called to it at the same time that cooking can be that same it's like it is another source of yeah creativity and discovery
Mhm.
and whatever and so it can be a very serious thing and it can be a very important thing but you're absolutely right that it's the extent to which she takes it has to be based on a enjoyment
Mhm.
of that kind of perfecting process of that scientific process and like yeah for me like the scientific process is the juice of it right that's the fun part
Mhm.
is like getting to the
Mhm.
point where you have discovered a thing that no one else in the world knows is like very very cool
Yeah.
um and like having answers to questions of like what if I do this versus this and then it's like oh I can like say with some confidence that like it's better to add 1 cup of sugar than 2 cups of sugar
Right.
to my cookies or whatever you're
Right.
doing right is like um answers to questions in a world that is like so large and so complex is very fun and like it is weird to me that she is being portrayed in this way when I don't feel like this is how she approaches science either. And so it's
Yeah.
like I don't know why cooking is thought to be different here, but it is. Um, but maybe there is a part of it where she is trying to give that weight to this thing that is happening, to
Mhm.
the importance of this homemaking and whatever. I just think she could do it without being like quite so forceful about it
Yeah, like,
in the
so,
way
like,
that she's like not fun.
joyless
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't really compute for me, but this idea that she's gonna approach the show like an experiment is very appealing to her, and we see that she goes home and, like, starts watching TV, she's studying as she tells Harriet, she's correlating the smiles to the ratings or whatever, she's, like, analyzing all these angles, what Harriet says is she doesn't know whether it's genius or crazy. It's I'm not like Harry. I'm not like Elizabeth in a lot of ways, but I do think that this kind of like this impulse to like make something homework is very much something that I can relate to. And it's like one of the
As
reasons
someone
I
that
like
has podcast with you on more than one occasion, I can absolutely confirm
and
that.
it's actually like podcasting makes me like watch TV more, like
Mhm.
ironically, because I'm like, oh, I have an assignment to do about
Yeah.
this show and I'm gonna like learn about it and like approach it from these. So I feel like Elizabeth is a kindred spirit here, but I think some of her the hypotheses about correlations between like ratings and laugh track or something. I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit half baked, but Harriet tells her, don't overthink it. And Elizabeth says, I've never understood what that saying means.
Yeah, Elizabeth is overthunk, everything in her
Mhm,
life.
mhm. At bedtime, Elizabeth and Madeline are reading Great Expectations. Elizabeth tells Mad that she's going to be working with Walter at the TV station, so their afternoons are going to be different. And Mad likes their afternoons, so this is sad. Elizabeth says she has to do what's expected of her, like Pip, the character in Great Expectations. Um, and that this school might be a better fit. Madeline is like not sold on going to a new school, but the kind of rule is she has to try it, but Madeline will have full veto power if she doesn't like the new school. So let's put a pin in this because we'll see if Elizabeth is able to keep her promise here that will indeed have veto power. um Dress rehearsal at the studio, it's kind of going as would be expected. Elizabeth hates the monologue that's written for her on the cue card. She's lost circulation in her arms because the dress is too tight. This dress would be magnificent on a mid-sized child. I'm a full-grown woman. She doesn't like the words because her conscience won't let her read them. She's prepared something else. May I? I will. I will. And then she starts launching into her own monologue here.
Yeah, I first of all, this whole, like, researching of the TV thing, just to go back to that, I thought was a bit funny because there's so first of all, the moment that he's like, "Think of it as an experiment," I was like, "That is so many variables." This
Mhm.
is a very complicated as someone, we've both done human research. Humans are really complicated. It's really hard to do experiments,
Right.
in real world situations. But yeah, this is all, very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and so, like, she comes in with her own idea about how this is gonna go. You're totally right about, like, this idea that, there's no such thing as control in these kinds of experiments, and Elizabeth is going to come in with her own approach here. But this is not going over well with Phil Lebensmall, who's played by Rainn Wilson. We were introduced to him in the last episode. And again, we have like very cartoon villain, like
Mhm.
this is this is the worst version representation of the patriarchy here in Phil, but I think that Rainn Wilson is like playing it in a really entertaining and funny way. So it works a little bit better for me than Donati did. And again, he says we need a sexy wife, loving mother every man wants to see when he gets home from work. He's appalled by Elizabeth's portrayal. And Walter explains that she's not just a cook and a mother, but she's a chemist, and we want to play up her credentials to give women something to aspire to. Walter thinks they can make something really meaningful, and I like this line: "Meaningful? What are you, Amish?"
What does it even mean? Uh, yeah, this, like, very cartoonish, wild the, like, suggestive potholders line did send me a little bit,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's it's very strange.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, clearly, like, the vision is that this is a show for men to, like, fantasize about what they want their wives to be like, and not a show for women who want to learn how to cook, right? Like, that's what Phil's vision is. In the meantime, we see the effect that this is having on Madeline's home life. She gets home and 6:30 gives her a note with her instructions for what she's supposed to do. There's a snack. She has a homework schedule. She's going to go to choir practice with Linda Sloan. And I like this comment from Elizabeth. And don't forget, God is not real, but we respect other people's belief systems, which is like very much how I parent. And I've, like, said things like this multiple times, so I felt very seen. And Madeline is, still very curious about details of her father's life, and we see that she's taking advantage of this unsupervised time to go into his study closet and find a box of demerits that he's been holding on to, which he stuffs in his pocket in her pocket before going off to choir.
Yeah, first of all, why is he holding on to these? I don't understand, but
Very weird,
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, this whole, like, sad, mad storyline, um,
Sad mad.
yeah,
Mm.
broke my heart a little bit, um, and it's tough, right? Like, she's going through a really big adjustment in her life,
Mhm.
and I, like it's tough. It's kind of talking about some of the complexities of, having um, parents who work outside the home and are
Yeah.
kind of carrying the, like, joint responsibility of parenthood and careers and all of
Mhm.
the work, but I think that it is, Mad seems very kind of well supported and well loved in her life. She just, yeah, I think it's just an adjustment period for her, and that
Yeah.
sucks, but I hope that she can, um I you know, I don't think the story of this show is that Matt is, like, suffering because her
Is
mom has a job.
neglected and
Like,
stuff. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and I think it highlights, like, particularly with women who work outside of the home, like, the idea of career is seen as, like, a selfish choice, but
Yep.
this idea it's like that these are the things that she's doing for her child, like, because
Mhm.
she thinks her child needs to go to a different school, whatever you think about that, that reason, but it's like she is doing something to provide for her child that is also taking up time that she could be spending with her child. And I do think that that kind of tension, especially on women, of being in that like lose-lose situation of like the things I need to do for my child take me away from my child in another way. And like you said, probably not a way that is like ultimately going to be harmful, but it's really difficult. And like that this is something that
Mhm.
Elizabeth has to juggle. That's one of the challenges that I think the show is portraying, which is why like I've said that even if the show isn't perfect, I do think it's like reflecting this perspective that we don't always see.
Yeah.
At church, the choir's practicing, and Reverend Wakely sees that Matt is sitting alone in the pews. They strike up a conversation, and he sees that she's working on a family tree. And we find out that he learns that she doesn't know anything about her father, but she has these demerits, and he decides to kind of become her co-conspirator in this mission to learn more about Calvin. He notices that the demerits say St. Luke's on them. Your dad went to a school called St. Luke's. Now we just have to find out which one.
Yeah, I thought this was really nice. I like the Reverend coming back here. I thought um I'm always a fan of, again, we sort of talked about this, but like more adults caring for children, right?
Yeah.
Like this felt very much like okay, like Elizabeth is doing this one thing to take care of Matt, and other adults are also stepping up in her life so
Mhm.
that she's being care. And so yeah, to me this just seemed like great, another like bonus adult to look out for Matt. I thought that was very cute, and they're kind of
Yeah.
like conspiratorial, like, oh, we'll like figure this out, whatever. I thought was
As long as
um
he doesn't get too proselytizy, I think it's
yeah.
great. Um, the dress rehearsals are, like, not going that great. I like this. Walter says, "Let's go and talk over a drink," and Elizabeth says that she doesn't drink, and he says, "I do." So, Elizabeth starts giving Walter a bunch of notes, and I really like that Walter, like, sort of recognizes that this isn't about Phil's vision versus, like, Elizabeth's notes. He says, "What we need to do well, the changes we need for the show. This is, the monologue he goes into where he says, I love, what I love about TV? Everything. It has the power to transport and entertain. It can make you feel a part of something. And the problem with the show today was I wanted to see you be you, not just a scientist." And she says, "Well, that is what I am." And he says, "That may be, but that's only a start." And I just like this whole exchange that he like recognizes who Elizabeth is. And even when she says that she's is a scientist and he says, "Well," he doesn't say, "Well, you're also a mother," or "You're also like a,"
Mhm.
it's like he doesn't define what she is, but he says that you're more than that.
Mhm.
Which I thought was like a very like lovely way for him to acknowledge, her as a whole person, even like more so that she's used to pushing against this like overly feminine projection that people put on her by kind of putting this scientist identity up front. And he's not saying, "Well, you're also a woman and you're also a mother." He's just saying like, "Let yourself be more than that." And I thought that that was, I really liked that way of stating it.
For sure. Yeah, I thought it was great that, yeah, you don't have to feminism does not have to be a rejection of the feminine, which is
Mhm.
a thing that I think, like, um, as, child raised in the 90s, was not always made
Mhm.
clear to me, at the
Mhm.
time, and is something that I've sort of come back around to.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think that that is very, um I think that this was very cool. I also love, it basically, made he has this line where he's talking about the Rainn Wilson character, and it felt like Santa Claus, where he's like, "He haunts me in my dreams, he haunts me when I'm awake," and I was like, "Oh, no."
He would make a good kinda evil Santa Claus. Um, so Supper of Six gets pushed up and it's like airing 2 weeks earlier than they expected it to. Walter goes and shares his news with Elizabeth and he says, "I should have probably told you this earlier, but we're the lowest rated channel, so not many people are gonna see it anyway. And actually Phil hates us and he might be doing this to kill the show." So she's going to have to go on, and like they're kind of throwing her into the deep end, sort of setting her up for failure. The set is cluttered with like all of this like tchotchkes and other stuff that Phil has insisted is there. The show starts with a live studio audience, and the first thing Elizabeth does is say, like, I take cooking seriously, and I know you do too. I also know that your time is precious, and so is mine. And in my experience, people do not appreciate the work and sacrifice that goes into being a mother, a wife, a woman. Well, I am not one of those people. At the end of our time together, we will have done something that is worth doing. We will have created something that will not go unnoticed. We will have made supper, and it will matter. And then she orders all of the men production assistants to come and clear the counter.
Yeah, I thought what a, like, lovely thesis for this, like,
Mhm.
show that she's doing. I thought it was really great. I loved that she sort of felt like she found her voice and she found what she was trying to do. Very quickly, maybe, but she did it.
She got there. She got there. And, cooking is chemistry and chemistry is life. Your ability to change everything, including yourself, starts here. Let's begin, shall we? And this is like a little bit of a tagline for the show. We get a montage of her, her doing the show, chopping, wearing a lab coat, wearing goggles. It's interspersed with the focus group montage. The focus group feedback, we see the men keep on interrupting all of the women and talking over them. They didn't like the show. They thought it was boring. Explain how you felt watching in one word. And one of the women speaks up and says, capable, which a man laughs off and says, "What does that even mean?" So it's clear that this is like resonating with the female audience, if not the male audience. We get like the closing line of the show: "Children set the table. Your mother needs a moment to herself."
Yeah, that's very cool.
At church, Matt is waiting outside for Linda to finish choir practice, and Reverend Wakely brings her a list of all the St. Luke's in states in alphabetical order, A through W. She asks why he's helping her, because people who don't ask questions have blind faith, and blind faith is the furthest thing from faith, which Madeline likes so much she actually writes it down. We find out that the show is a raging hit, even though Phil is trying to confront Elizabeth with the negative focus group feedback. But the phones are ringing off the hook. And one of the secretaries runs in and says that we're getting a lot of questions about the show. What is CH3COOH? It's vinegar. And then the secretary says we're going to have to hire more girls to keep up with the volume of calls. So the show is a really big hit, and that is, communicated through this montage of Elizabeth on TV. We see her really growing into herself as a host. Matt is watching Home Alone with 630, looking sad. We see Harriet also watching and really like being a cheerleader for how awesome Elizabeth is kicking butt, which was really, really nice. But all of this is like coming at a cost, because when Elizabeth gets home, we see that like Madeline is kind of really, really struggling with having this adjustment to the new school and missing her mother. And it's really heartbreaking how they show how, just how much this little girl is like trying to keep it together and really, really struggling with it.
Yeah, it sucks. I, like, feel really bad for her. This feels like kind of a no-win
Mhm.
situation for Elizabeth, which I think is true in the point.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel really bad for both of them in this.
Yeah, and they try to go out to the diner to, like, have this, like, mother-daughter moment, but even that gets so interrupted by the waitress,
Mhm.
approaching her as a fan and asking for an autograph. So, I mean, this is, like, gonna be the, like, pulling at the heartstrings, like, one of those moments in this show where Elizabeth is succeeding and thriving, and it's, like, coming at a cost for her home life. As the camera pans out from the diner, we see that Elizabeth's face is on a big billboard just outside.
Yeah.
And that's the episode.
Yeah, so it was like once I caught up to where all the characters were, I
Mhm.
enjoyed it. It was just the first like the first maybe third of this episode. I was like, "What is happening? Why why did we skip so many things?"
Mhm.
But once I caught up, then I was a fan. And then it was interesting because I was like, "Oh, this is the show I thought we were watching from the very beginning."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're now in the timeline that I thought this whole show would be about. So,
Yeah, it's fun to be in the cooking show era of the series and to see like how Elizabeth is going to infuse her background as a chemist with her approach to hosting the show and what this is going to mean for the women who are her fans. So I'm excited to be there. I'm looking forward to Apple posting more recipes that I can try out. I have to say, I made the chicken and I made the lunchbox brownies, which are peanut butter swirl chocolate brownies that are really, really amazing. So I highly recommend
nice.
those. I've posted the recipe in the Discord along with pictures. I'm a little bit limited in what I can cook from this show because one of my children has a milk protein allergy that he's actually currently getting treatment for. So hopefully one day I will be able to cook with cheese again. Um,
Oh, no.
but I might try a couple of other recipes. I think I can do the blackberry pie, so that might be one that I try over the next week.
Nice. Yeah, report back. I, have not tried to I've had very mixed success with pie dough in the
Yeah,
past.
pie is tough.
I blame this is like a whole other thing. Canadian butter is weird. We have like a
Oh,
very strong dairy lobby in Canada, so it is very,
interesting.
very expensive to buy non-Canadian dairy products.
Mhm.
And our butter has a lower fat content than butter from other places. And so most recipes that
Interesting.
I
Yes.
find it affects pastry because the butter ratio is off.
Yes.
So,
I'm so glad you
yeah.
said that. Like, behind the scenes, I think we might have to skip our name a woman scientist this week because I have another conflict, so we're gonna have to wrap up quickly, but I will say, like, I tried the chicken recipe, and one of the reasons I think the chicken recipe didn't work is because of the moisture content of butter, which I would love to talk about more, but cooking is experiments, so your butter is
Yeah.
gonna be different than somebody else's butter. Your oven is gonna be different from somebody else's oven. So following a recipe is not always gonna work. You're gonna have to replicate it. You're gonna have to adjust certain things. It's all fun stuff. Melissa, where can people keep up with everything that you're doing? What else do you have going on?
Follow me on Twitter, Melissa W28, Melissa Woodward places, all the usual stuff, D20, Goosebumps, Doctor Who. You've heard it before. Please send us in your women in STEM. We will share them. The rest, maybe we'll do 2 next week to make up for it.
Yes.
And send us your feedback.
Um, Great. And yes, you can follow me on Twitter where I am Dr. Amanda R. That's Dr. Amanda R. And give special attention to one thing. Ariel and I have just started covering 6 Feet Under season 1, which just aired on Netflix, or just it just got picked up by Netflix. So starting November 1st, you can stream all of 6 Feet Under there. So that's prompting our rewatch. I've gotten into it. I'm going to have a lot of fun talking about the show. So definitely check that out.
Thanks, everybody. And catch us here next time for episode 6 of Lessons in Chemistry.
Bye
Bye.
bye.